good afternoon. This is Julie and JP with Book of Hours. This is Bookmark, our weekly podcast where we wrap up the week's events.
Yay!
Yay! So let's get started.
Yeah. It's been another tough week. Yeah?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, we can start with something. There was a video that came out, was it this morning or yesterday?
Yeah.
And it kind of fell into place with what we were planning to talk about anyway, something that Julie's been talking about, the masks and everything. What do you...
Well, I think what I wanted to, I've talked about it before, but I think it's a good idea to kind of bring it back home that we're now living in this religion. Corona and the mask.
The new religion.
Is the new religion.
Mm-hmm.
It's really just, and just very quickly, the thing about getting into a cult leaders are very wishy-washy. They're very on again, off again. So this business of you're open, no you're closed, no you're open, no you're closed, or mask on, mask off. It's always very confusing. You never know which way where you're coming or going. And that's the thing about being indoctrinated into a cult, is that they want to confuse you so that you give up your sense of yourself, your sense of your sovereignty, they want you to suspend your cognitive thought process so that you just obey, so that you just fall into allegiance. And so that to me seems more like a cult than like taking a very serious health issue scientifically. None of this is scientific. There's no scientific basis or protocols for any of this. This is all about the new religion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's like a religion.
Yeah. So this video of this statue being erected, it's in Latvia. I guess it's at a hospital. I have no idea. It's dedicated to the healthcare worker, and she has a mask, as you can see, and gloves. It's very But the thing that I noticed though is that they're erecting this statue while 3 weeks ago, whatever, at the beginning of this month, they were tearing down statues, and using various reasons for that. And so, in a lot of senses, it was like tearing down history was the main thing, even though they were giving, reasons for racism past and whatever the reasons were, they were tearing down history and taking away what we knew from the past. Even though they might have been obscure statues and artworks, it was still representative of the past. Whereas now, the future is Corona and the mask. Right? So we have this person who represents that.
Yep. That's why it's a religion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I mentioned this before in a Periscope. Sometimes I do these really short snippets of podcasting on a platform called Periscope, which uploads directly onto Twitter. But something that I had read years ago really kind of, it came up to the surface again in my mind. Like I was remembering that I had read this, and I think it takes somewhere between 12 to 16 weeks for a person to be indoctrinated into their new religion or into their new cult. So that's about the right time frame when we're looking at when the simultaneous lockdown took place sort of across the globe. I would say that it all happened within a 2-week time span from early March to mid-March. So you have to think of it as the walls coming down all across the globe in various countries and cities. And so if we look at, say, mid-March, and now we're in mid-July, so March to April, April to May, May to June, June to July, that's 4 months. So we've... it's
about 16 weeks.
So those people who are now indoctrinated into their new religion, and I have talked about this before, and I won't stop talking about it, they're in love with their new religion. New inductees they're like newborn babies.
Mm-hmm.
They have the newborn baby smell. They love their new religion. They love whatever it is that they're attaching themselves to.
Yeah.
They're bonding. They're in the bonding phase right now. So the people that are wearing the masks that love it and that are anxious and excited for the shot or the inoculation, you can't really try to convince them otherwise, because they're in that really fragile state.
Mm-hmm.
So just let them figure it out on their own. Eventually they'll come around, and they may not.
They may not.
But,
well, there's a proverbial phrase out there, something like, the most zealous person of a given religion is the recent convert.
Right.
That's a paraphrase of that.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think that's true, and I think that's what's going on here
Mm-hmm.
in this case. And it's weird to see how the mask dialogue and everything about it, the speaking terms, the narrative about it in the news media, in everywhere, everywhere. The politicians are pushing it, how it's just amped up and ramped up and become like pervasive, almost daily barrage of talk about a mask, which kind of leads us to our next topic, which along the same lines, and that's the dealing with like these local policies and decrees that are being made by politicians about having to wear a mask. And did you have anything about that?
Well, I mean, yeah, I think we all know at this point that there is no official law in the United States that states that you have to wear a mask. There's no law in place. What you are hearing from, say, your bus company or from your governor or your representative or your mayor or, your mom's best friend, what you're hearing is a suggestion. It's not a law, and it's not a mandate, because laws don't work that way.
Right.
Laws work, there's a very specific way that laws have to be passed. Mm-hmm. And for instance, in the state of Pennsylvania, the House and the Senate have to come together and decide that for the good of humanity and for the good of Pennsylvanians, that they have to pass laws. Then those laws typically would be presented to the public, and the public could vote on those laws.
It all depends.
Depends on,
But
I would say for something like this, that the public should have a vote, a voice in this process.
Well, it depends on the law that's being created. Sometimes if it's like in California, a lot of times the legislature can just come up with something, and then it goes to the governor, and the governor signs it. Now, sometimes that's presented as a proposition that's taken then to the voters to vote on. And in California, it's a republic, so there people can actually create a campaign to put something in front of the legislature to say, we want this to be voted on, and it'll go about that way. But ultimately what's going on, and I think what Julie is referring to, is the fact that the governor of any state and the mayor of any city cannot just make a law by themselves, even if it's
Can't do that.
and not even the president. Now they've been relying more and more on emergency powers, and they're falling back on that precedent of the president using emergency powers to do X, Y, or Z. And now the governors have taken that on and saying, oh, well, we have Emergency Powers Act, blah, 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 you have to do this, that, and the other thing. Well, that's not a law. That is a temporary act or thing, rule, in order to, help take care of like a flood or an emergent disaster, whatever it might be. And this thing has been going on far longer than any emergency act, I think, other than maybe what the president has done. But they've been using it for things like terrorism and stuff like that, and that's what they were not designed for. They're designed for other things, and so they're being abused by all the politicians out there on both sides of the aisle. And in this case, the governors are coming out there and starting to abuse this and abuse the citizenry by decreeing these things. So they've basically made themselves the monarch of the state, and saying, this is the law, when it really isn't. It's not the law. It's just these are suggested ways we want you to behave. Now, if you don't agree with that, you don't have to follow that law. However, they are starting to make it hard for people. in
Right.
different cities and states. We didn't write them down, but
So I think what happens is okay. So that was a very sort of out there, broad explanation about what's going on, which is great. But let's talk real, okay? So you go into a store, and the store manager says it's the law. You have to wear a mask. You have to socially distance. You have to give over your firstborn. You have to shave your head. It's the law. It's the law. It's the law. It's the law. And you say, well, actually, no, it's not the law. So then the manager, the store manager might say, oh, well, okay, it's my store policy then. And my store policy says no shirt, no shoes, no mask, no service. If you don't wear a shirt and you don't wear shoes and you don't wear a mask, then you can't get any service. That's what that means. And you would respond with, well, actually, there's actually no specific law either that says no shirt, no shoes. That's actually there's nothing.
It's just a common practice.
It's a common practice,
and it's based on something that came about to prevent hippies from going into stores without shoes or shirts on.
So it's discriminatory in nature,
right? And it's only been around since 1972. So it's a discriminatory policy that hasn't been around that long, and is now being used as another precedent to justify
more discrimination.
More discrimination, exactly. Yeah,
so the mask rule and the you must wear a mask policy in each store, that is a discriminatory policy. That in itself is an act of discrimination. I'm going to repeat that to you because this is where your legal rights come in. You know, I'm not talking health, I'm not talking whatever. I'm talking about how it is being used as a policy by which to discriminate against you. And each state has their own, protective measures in place. So in the state of Pennsylvania, it's called the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act. And it's right on the phrc.pa.gov website. And it's very clear that, you cannot be discriminated against based on, medical disability or religious background or whatever. Mm-hmm. There's a whole slew of ways that you cannot be discriminated against in the public sector out there in the world. So all you would have to do is say, well, your store policy is discriminating against me. Mm-hmm. And then you've got yourself a lawsuit.
Right.
So
now, and we were talking about this earlier, and I want to talk about this because it's easy to get caught up in minutia, and so I want to bring this up because I don't want you going there. You have to focus back on, this is discriminatory, unlawful practices. I went to a store and I told them that I couldn't wear a mask for health reasons, and they said, well, can you wear it over your mouth? And I said, well, what good does that do? It doesn't, I don't want to wear it over my mouth. Well, it's store policy that you have to wear it. So they kept throwing things in front of me.
Lots of distractions, like crazy people do.
And so a lot of times people will get into that minutia and start going, well, but the droplets and the blah, 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 and the blah, blah, blah. You don't do that. Don't worry about that. Just stick with the fact that, their corporate policy is overruled by state law. Period. Mm-hmm. Now, this particular store has lots of policies that I could probably argue with them over, but I don't because it doesn't make that much of a difference. In this case, it kind of does, and it has a lot to do with discriminating against people because of health issues or because, whatever. I shouldn't have to wear it anyway.
Right.
And
so you are being discriminated against, no matter who you are, no matter what your background is. I really don't care. But the fact is that you are being discriminated against when you read a sign that says you must wear a mask to enter into our premises. That is discrimination. And that is corporate policy. That is not state mandated law. That is not a law by any stretch. In fact, the very law states that the thing that you're reading on the window or on the sign is actually against the law. It's actually in violation of the law. So if the store does not want to be fined or cited by the state by which they operate under, so in the state of Pennsylvania, if you're running a store and you have one of those signs on your window, and I were to say, oh, well, protected agency, state office, this particular corporation is discriminating against me, and I can see that they're clearly doing it with this sign that they have in the window, then the state will say, you have to take down your sign. I mean, that's like a very clear-cut legal explanation. Mm-hmm. I don't care about gossip and hearsay and shaming campaigns and public humiliation and all these things that we're doing to each other. If you were to present the state law in front of a judge, and then you were also to present the poster in front of the judge, and that you saw on the window that said masks are required, the judge would go by law, and the judge would have to say, yes, this is a violation of the law. And so would any police or sheriff that may be called. They would support you.
Well, we would hope so anyway.
Because we have to assume that right now the police and the sheriff are not compromised and are still, able to do their job in some way.
Well, at this point, I mean, it's like, are they upholding the law, or are they going along with
corporations? So you have to ask your police, just have a very frank conversation. Would you support the store, or would you support the law? It's that, I mean, these are very simple conversations. We don't need to make it confusing. Right. We don't even need to talk about it that much. Yeah. It's a very simple thing. You walk into a store, you're not wearing a mask. If they say to you, I have a policy, just like my no shirt, no shoes policy, you could say, well, actually, that policy is discriminatory in nature, just like your mask policy. And by even bringing it up, you're making it so that I have to disclose to you something that by law I don't have to disclose to you, which is either a religious background that says you shouldn't wear a mask and cover your face, or a medical disability that says that obstructing your airways may do you harm, or whatever. The very fact that the manager would even say something to you is already a violation and a discrimination against you. So you kind of have to go in with the expectation that you will constantly be discriminated against.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay? And you have to be able to say, okay, well, do I want to walk out, or do I want to escalate this and maybe file a lawsuit against them?
Yeah.
It's up to you.
Yeah. But the whole point, though, I guess is, it's set up to make people uncomfortable and cause stress, and certainly we feel it as well. Mm-hmm. So don't think that we're not in the same boat that you are, because it certainly is not. It's not fun to deal with, And
no, it's not. No. It's not. Yeah. I feel for everyone.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But again, you don't have to disclose what your illness is because they're not allowed to ask that. All right, so don't volunteer information.
Right, I see a lot of people, getting doctor's notes and all sorts of crazy stuff, and religious notes from their rabbis and their, priests and all this crazy stuff. It's like, you don't need to do any of that.
Yeah, you don't have to justify your, them discriminating against you.
Right, the law in your state, and all you have to do is go to you could just type in Civil Code for Discrimination, State of Alabama or State of Washington or whatever.
Wherever you live.
It's very clear. Yeah. And I just did that. I went to the state of Pennsylvania and I found it. Mm-hmm. And so it's right there. So it's really simple. I would say there are other things to think about. Yeah. We'll address those in a little bit.
So the next thing we wanted to talk about today is we came across a video earlier this week that basically was very powerful, was saying a lot of things that we've been saying, and so we glommed onto it immediately. But then after we started looking at it a while and thinking about it, it didn't quite feel right. And a lot of you may have seen it. It's the iconic podcast monologue number 1. And we'll play a video clip so that you can get an idea of what we're talking about. Mm-hmm.
What we're actually seeing is the systematic implementation of the fall of the republic and the rise of the corporation of the United States. every major event is a step in the ladder to achieve that end.
So what you've had a lot of thoughts about this.
Yeah, so Jeremy Elliott is the dude who's speaking, and he comes out of the RPG realm, which is role-playing gaming, and he's connected to somebody, I forget his name, I think it's Matthew something. He's connected to somebody who's got like 500,000 subscribers on YouTube. And role-playing gamers are really interesting. They're typically libertarians, but they're also, and they're very smart. And, even Jeremy used the right definition of the Hegelian dialectic. I thought that JP and I were the only ones on the planet that ever got
used it right. Yeah.
That had ever used it right. It's not problem, reaction, solution. That's not what it is. It's thesis, antithesis, and then synthesis.
Right.
So it's kind of like, this
argument,
counter-argument, and then
a way of
presenting a new synthesis of those two kind of ideas, right? So it's not as simple as problem, reaction, solution. It's a little more complicated than that.
It's based on philosophical
It's philosophy,
debate,
right.
and
which is never
ideas,
easy to just pin down.
Right.
Philosophy is not meant to, So anyway, the thing about him is that he is what we like to call controlled opposition. Everything he says hits home perfectly.
Right.
It's spot on. Even his definition of the Hegelian dialectic is spot on. But the problem is that you have to look at, who's funding it. So all of these sort of role-playing gamer types are funding it. And what they do is they create avatars and programs and systems all in the gaming world, so that, and these people are really smart. In fact, if they were out there in the real world applying all of that, ingenuity to the real world, then we would probably be in a much better position than we're in right now. The problem is that they're all online. It's all about being online, and it's all about generating more gamers and more role players. It's not really about working outside of this oppressive system that we're all in right now.
Right.
It's really just about drawing you back into the internet, back into a role-playing game. And I would say that based on some of the things that we're going to talk about later, that they are definitely there to remind you about your lack of humanity, just in the same way that the masks are to remind you that you're not really a human being that's to cover your face. They want you going into these role-playing situations and learning all of this, technology and all of these different systems to get you to identify more with what's going on in, virtual reality and in the computer and all these graphics rather than what's really going on in the real world. Definitely huge, cautionary tale here. I would exercise great caution. Just take it for what it's worth, but what it's, on its for its face value, it's great, but it's controlled opposition.
And I think what got us talking about it was just the very production values, the high production values and the aesthetics that were there. Julie and I were talking about that for a couple days before we realized, but that's what's causing us to question the message behind it. There is a message, and it's what he's saying, like what Julie was saying, was, it hit all the marks, right? But what is going on behind that made us suspicious. Now, we try to bring, high quality production values as well as, good aesthetics. So, what does that say about us? But I think what's going on is you have to look at who's being funded. Right. Or how this group is being funded, or how this video is being funded. Now, we have our funders on our Patreon page, but they're not, they're not like thousands of dollars. Not to say that the less you make, the more, valid you are authentic. But I think that you have to look at, how that money is being provided and who's providing it, to get a better idea of that authentication. Or authenticity that's involved with that person. or that persona. In this case, I feel like this guy that's talking is actually just a persona and not really somebody who's coming across, because it was just too
slick,
good. Yeah.
So
and I think he was probably an actor.
Exactly. I was just going to say, Jeremy has probably been hired by the group of people, the RPGs, the role playing gamers that run Iconic Podcast. So Iconic Podcast is Jeremy Elliott, but it's run by these role players and these gamer types. So all that he's there to do is to pull more people into these VR virtual reality scenarios, which ultimately keep you from connecting organically and humanely with like your neighbors and your friends, to really talk about what's happening in the world right now. Sorry to burst your bubble, because this video has been like getting thousands of shares, and it's not it's good information, but
take from it what you can, okay? Because like Julie said, the talking points are great, okay, but just consider the fact that it's probably like a higher quality junk food than you would normally buy, or it's air popped popcorn and not or whatever. It's something that is you take it in, but keep in mind who's behind it and what is really the message behind it. In this case, buyer beware. And it's free, but the same applies, right? You're taking this in and you're buying into what's being said. So just make sure that you understand all the levels. And I think a lot of our audience tends to be more media savvy and aware, media educated. There's a word that I'm trying to not coming up with. So I think that our audience understands that more than, say, the average person. But just keep that in mind, and understand that that's what's going on behind this thing. And again, like I said, it on the surface it's not bad.
Right. And there's, and this is a really good thing to bring up too about his podcast, which will segue us into this next thing that I know has been really bugging you, and you really want to talk about it. Was that in his monologue, there's really no class analysis. If you really if you go back to it's only a 5-minute monologue. There's nothing about class. So,
and it's just the litany of complaints or pointing out things, and so that's when you start looking at the content and start breaking it down, then you start seeing where it's falling apart.
Right, because I would argue that anything that comes across your feed that does not have a class analysis in it is controlled opposition,
right.
Or it's a huge motherfucking distraction.
Well, so then segueing into the thing that you were talking about, so this has been something I've been seeing a little more of every day this last week. When I was doing some research on another topic, I came across this website, and it had this big old banner on the homepage, and I'll put it up for you. Basically, it was introducing the language of racism into everyday lexicon. So they're starting to bring in the phrase white supremacy and applying it to everyday life.
Everything.
And everything. And it's shocking, and it freaks me out because it's really creepy, and it's designed to do that, and it's designed to allow for nasty language to start attacking people who are just average people. They're not racist. There may be attitudes and norms that go along with social norms that go along with people that haven't been addressed, that should be addressed, but that's not what's taking place. They're going immediately to, as I used the word or the phrase earlier, of amped up and ramped up language in order to get people in a defensive posture, okay, and defending, and so then you get people arguing over these things and arguing over racism, about racism, in terms that are just completely off the chart, and ways that none of us have ever really talked to each other, because it's really, the language itself it's not kind, and it's not intended to be, okay? It's intended to get you into those places that are very hurtful and very ugly, and calling somebody a white supremacist is very toxic. It's a very toxic thing. And one of the things, and so like what Julie said, is just one of the things we notice, though, however, is that these organizations that are doing this are of the managerial class. They are of the people that are the upper middle class, who are in charge of corporate departments, or they're in corporations, or they're part of NGOs, non-governmental organizations, or SMOs, social movement organizations, or nonprofits. Okay, and these are the people that are disseminating these policies out there in your community, and they're starting to use the language of racism. Now, the one that I noticed was they were putting the label of being privileged and white, and saying, yes, white supremacy is in our world, and we have not done enough to address that. And so immediately what they're doing is they're taking this thing in and deflecting it back out, saying, although we know this is happening, we're not those people, and but you are. And
so okay, so
and and then okay, so go ahead, and then I'll kind of.
So the organization. So he's talking in these kind of broad, like not generic, but just very broad terms, which I'm sure we all kind of understand what he's talking about. But let's give a very precise, specific example. The San Francisco Bicycle Coalition is the largest member-funded coalition in the country. This means that it is a coalition full of bicyclists, thousands of bicyclists that pay dues every month to be a part of this group, part of this organization. There is no other bicycle coalition in the United States that is of this caliber.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they came out with a statement recently. Their director, Brian Wiedemeyer, came out recently with a statement that said, we're white supremacists and we recognize this and we're going to do something about it. And, it's this very kind of like, amped up language. And it's kind of weird, because what I see in my head when I read something like that is a bunch of black people standing around San Francisco who are scratching their heads going, we don't think you're white supremacists. We never said you were white supremacists. Why are you calling yourself white supremacists? We never said that. So what they're doing is they're not giving the black people in San Francisco an opportunity to even think about it. They're just basically co-opting the language and saying, we're white supremacists. What are you going to do about it? Like, they're just kind of being this really weird, aggressive language, okay? But the reality of it, the real deal about this is that all SMOs, all NGOs, and all NPOs, so social movement organizations, non-governmental organizations, and nonprofit organizations, they're all funded in this particular category of the Black Lives Matter movement. They're all funded under this huge umbrella of every massive corporation on the planet. They're all heavily funded. One of the things that each of these organizations have to do, especially the Bicycle Coalition, which has the largest number of members in their coalition, they have to show outwardly that they recognize their own privilege and their own whiteness or whatever. So this is basically, this letter that the director wrote, this is basically to appease his funders.
Right.
Okay, he wants to get his
His grant.
$600,000 grant for
Right.
this quarter. He wants to justify his $350,000 a year paycheck. So in order to do that, he's got to come out and say, my organization is full of white people, and I guess we're white supremacists.
Right.
So okay,
and that's
it's
easy,
not,
right? Because their membership's like 82% white.
Exactly. And it's easy to do in San Francisco, which is a very privileged white supremacist city. It really is.
Well,
but it's also not identifying class analysis.
Exactly. So you've got a bunch of so even there was an organization that was attached to them that I was looking at last week. I can't remember the name. We may have talked about them already, but basically everybody was of the same class, more or less. Even though you had different skin colors, okay, you had the different races, you had the identity politics going on there. And so what happens is with this thing is they are focusing only on the identity politics, but they are not addressing the issues of poverty. And
never.
And they seem to skip that part, right?
Totally.
So upper middle class people are now putting out prescriptions to impoverished neighborhoods, saying, you need to have bike lanes in your neighborhoods, and you need to have this and that and the other thing. We need to slow the streets down, so cars can't go on there. That will allow people to walk through and walk in the street if they need to, so that they can socially distance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So what they're doing is putting out these prescriptions to the impoverished neighborhoods and marginalized communities without really thinking about them or talking to them. They're just talking at them.
Exactly.
And that's the biggest problem with this.
Right.
And all this language that's going on.
Right. So just to really drive what he just said, really drive it home, you look at something like, hey, bike lanes, hey, slow streets, that sounds good. Safer streets for children, safer bike lanes. Hey, I'm all for it. We're all for it. Hey, I got a bicycle right here.
We're both cyclists, right?
So we love to ride our bikes.
Yeah, I love bike lanes. I hate having to deal with traffic.
But unfortunately, we understand that these sustainable development models, again, sustainable development, another Orwellian term, which is actually the opposite of what it means, is basically going into these neighborhoods, like he just said, and forcing these new improvements into these neighborhoods without even asking the locals how they feel about it.
Right.
And slowing down the streets, if you want to get into the AI tech part of it, it's all to roll out the surveillance, so that we can all be surveilled and have our privacy once again excoriated for profit. Mm-hmm. So this great non-profit, or SMO, called the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition is actually advocating for more enslavement mm-hmm. of human beings in general. Like if you just follow the markers down the road, mm-hmm. like that's what they're advocating for. But one thing that JP has brought up to me time and time again, and I don't think I'm speaking out of turn here. We like to ride our bikes. We like to do that. But we live in a largely black community right now in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
And poor.
And poor. And the people here are very, very proud of their cars. They're very proud of their cars. Their cars to them represent a status, represent freedom, okay? And whatever else their mm-hmm. cars represent. Right. And I respect them for that. And I don't try to push my love of bicycling and all that onto them, and they don't try to push their love of cars onto me. We have a mutual respect for our positions. Organizations like the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition don't do that. They're just like, well, everybody should like riding a bike. Everybody should just like a bike, Mm-hmm. And it doesn't give any thought to each individual's background, what brought them to their decision to want to be in a car in the first place. Maybe they're the first generation who are able to afford a car. Like, you have no idea. Right, exactly. And to just impose your sanctimonious upper middle class, private organization onto, the poorer population. It just comes down to class warfare, no matter how how you pretty it up with your Brian, with your statement that says, "Oh, we're white supremacists and we recognize our own white supremacy." No, I'm not buying it, and neither are the poor people,
Right.
Especially the poor people of color.
So I'm
no.
gonna put up a graphic. It's a screenshot that I took from Winter Oak. Their quote of the day. It came out yesterday. So today's the 13th. So it came out yesterday, and it's basically along the lines of what we've been talking about in how these groups are stealing the language away from minorities and they're controlling the self-definition of marginalized and minority communities. So I'll put that up, and you can look at that and read the quote for a moment.
Yeah, Winter Oak is great. Okay, so I just wanted to remind everybody that what we're dealing with is unlike anything that you've ever experienced before. So for years, I feel like JP and I have been trying to do this sort of like class analysis. We have been, really critical of capitalism. We've become, more and more focused in our work to try to describe what's happening as it's happening. But there was a sense of like, well, what's the point of keeping this huge class divide? What's the point of generating more and more poverty among American society and global society? Like, what's the point of all this? And now we've come to this juncture in our human experience where I finally figured out what the point is, and the point is to do away with our humanity. That's what the masks are all about. That's what these campaigns of shaming is all about. That's what these identity politic movements are all about. And that's what generational poverty that's been created and manufactured for dozens and dozens and hundreds of years has been all about. It's been about to wear us down to the point where we just give up our humanity. And I'm not talking about human rights. I'm not talking about constitutional protections. I'm talking about what it's like to be a human being, to have choice and to feel. Because what they're working on and what they're fast tracking for the globe is an inoculation or a shot that will push us into the next phase of our evolution. And the only way that we can be pushed into the next phase of evolution is through great poverty and great distress and great pain and agony. Not through enlightenment and not through, advances in technology and science. That's not, they tell you that that's how it is, but that's not really what's happening. So you have to think hard about what you want. Some of you have been born into poverty, and then your children were born into poverty, and then your children's children were born into poverty, and you just keep seeing it reinvent itself throughout generations, and you wonder, when is it ever going to stop? When am I ever going to have that opportunity or be able to slide into that meritocracy where I have an option to actually make something of myself? And this thing that's looming over us, whether you want to call it transhumanism or whatever you want to call it, this thing might present itself as the very thing that pushes you into those opportunities that you've never had. And I would say that, be discerning. People lie. It's probably not what you think it is. It might be. But see, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm only here to tell you my thoughts and my feelings
around what's
this.
coming. Yeah.
And so all of this analysis, all of this class analysis, that's left, right, divide, and now we've switched it from left, right to top down, discussions, because that's what it is. All of it leads to this excoriation or this removal of choice. where thoughts and feelings and knowledge and understanding about the world won't come through a natural process of growth and making mistakes and being a human being full of error, full of problems and contradictions.
And making discoveries because of that.
Right, and then making discoveries because of those contradictions. Instead, you will be this shell of a human being that is kind of like downloadable. I know it sounds very Matrix and very scientific, or science fiction, but I'm telling you that this is what's going on. This is this is the path that they want for us. They want to push us into the next phase of evolution. And you have to decide. You can make a choice while you still have the opportunity to choose in your head and heart. You have to make a choice. Do I want to do that? Some people will leap into it happily and say, yes, I want to be a transhumanist individual where I'm uploaded into the system and the system makes money off of me and I might get a benefit from that and I won't hurt anymore over, how I'm going to buy groceries or pay my rent. I'll always be taken care of. Some people are ready for that. Some people really, really need that because of the generational poverty that's been done to them.
But I think ultimately that won't be the case. We'll always be kept on the hook,
right?
For resources for ourselves. We will never be in a place, if we enter that so-called matrix, whatever it might be, that we will only be exploited.
You're never ever.
And you will never get ahead.
Ever going to get ahead in this system, in this new evolution.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. It's false. It's very much like, the emperor's new clothes.
Or a deal with the devil.
Right, or the deal with the devil. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not good. It's not anything that I would ever want to transition into.
Yeah.
And but because people have been so put upon for generations, and weren't born into that class where they always are, have money and are taken care of, I would not fault people for just assimilating into it, and that's what the mask is about. The mask is to wipe away your humanity, little by little by little by little, so that you forget that you're a human being with choice and free thought, and you can look at evidence that you're given and make your own decisions about your health or your life or your children's life. The mask kind of forces you to take all of that away from yourself. So some people love their new religion and they're loving the mask, so chances are they will love to assimilate into this new phase of evolution, and you kind of just have to let them do that. But then they'll probably regret it in the long run, because as he just said, you're never going to get on top. That's not what it's designed for. It's not designed to make you happy. It's not designed to fulfill you. It's designed to sort of always keep you running in the cage like a little gerbil, trying to get to the next, phase of success or something, and that's never going to happen.
It's designed to use you.
Yeah, it's
and exploit
totally,
you. Yeah.
Totally. It's all about you being a slave, and you're not a slave. So I hope that makes sense. But I really felt strongly about this, and I need people to think about it on their own and decide for themselves. I'm not over here going, wake up, wake up. That's not how we operate.
No. We look at ourselves as instructors and teachers, and we're here to tell you about things. You have to make up your own mind how you feel about them.
Right.
We'll identify things, and we've had people challenge us on some of these things. But just know that we're not trying to tell you what to do. We're trying to tell you about things to think about.
Right.
And
I've noticed that a lot of people that are in our position, which we're very aware of what the masks really represent. They really represent this introduction into this anti-human new evolution. People have noticed, I noticed those people who are kind of like aware of what the masks really represent, they're kind of like okay with people who do wear masks. Whereas the people who are wearing the masks are not okay with us, which is really strange.
Right.
It's really interesting.
Now, I am not okay with anybody wearing a mask unless that's that it's like really, really for their health purposes. And I know that there are some people. It's not about protecting the rest of us; it's about protecting themselves.
I think that what I'm trying to say, and maybe this is where he and I differ, is that I look at somebody who loves the mask and I go, okay, well, you love the mask. Good for you. You want to do away with your humanity. Maybe life's been really, really tough on you. Maybe being a human being, full of contradictions and error and hurt feelings and always being offended, maybe that hasn't been working out for you to this point and you're ready to transition into something else. And by putting on the mask, you're feeling very empowered and very good about your decision to walk away from your humanity and from choice. You're really happy about that. And I have to just say, then go right ahead. I gotta just say, then that's
I'm not going to force people not to, but I'm not going to respect them for it either.
I don't necessarily respect them, but I just say, I kind of just don't care, honestly. Like, I'm like, that's just their choice, I look around and when I see everybody masking up and I know what it's really about and I feel really sad, but I don't fault them for it.
Well, I do when they turn it on me and
right, and until they get in our face and try to aggressively push it onto us, the only thing I can say is, well, we're not doing that to you. Why are you doing it to us?
I had a bus driver tell me that I was making it political, and I was like, no, it's not political, and I'm not making it. I'm not the one making it political.
No. The people who are putting the mask on are making that political decision to allow themselves to be manipulated and coerced into, something that will eventually enslave them and already is enslaving them. You have to look at it this way. I mean, what if it was chains? What if it was chains around their neck, And that's, whenever I see a whole bunch of people in masks, that's kind of like where my mind goes. Like if I'm out, which is rare, but if I am somewhere and I see hundreds of people wearing a mask, or dozens, there's never really hundreds of people in Pittsburgh, then all I can see in with my eyes is chains, and they're all chains around their neck, and they're all linked together with the chains around their neck, and there's some unseen force, usually a corporation, that is like pulling them along, and I feel so happy that I'm not a part of that.
Yeah.
So but at the same time, it's not my job to go try to break those chains.
Right.
I feel bad for them. And the thing is, too, it's like they're walking around with the chains around their neck, and they're all hooked up to each other, and they're slaves, but they have the key in their pocket. And all they have to do is unlock it.
Right.
And that's what kills me.
Right.
It's like, you get it, but you still choose to do it. So at that point, you just have to go,
yeah, well,
I guess you love it.
Yeah.
You love it.
And you have to do that with a lot of situations that are like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess after that bit, we can end with something a little lighter, a video on the way out, and we can sign off now.
Okay, bye. Thanks.
Okay, we'll see you next week. Bye.
Are you tired of people complaining about literally everything every day? Do you find yourself overly annoyed by the actions of others? Then you need Phucumol. When prescribed by your doctor, Phucumol can significantly reduce your ability to give a fuck. Tired of Karens not minding their business? People complaining about masks got you down? Phucumol. Phucumol has been tested and proven to help you not give a fuck.
I used to give a fuck, but now that I've tried Phucumol, I don't give a fuck at all.
If you continue to give a fuck after taking Phucumol, please consult with your physician. Side effects may include insensitivity, lack of care, and an extreme case of minding your damn business.
Book of Hours is determined to remain an essential platform that offers a creative interpretation for lockdown skeptics and experts who have been censored by mainstream press. Thanks to your donations, we can carry on doing this essential work as working artists. These big issues of the day are vital and need to be heard. So please share our videos, subscribe to our YouTube channel, make a one-time donation on our PayPal page, but most importantly, please be a part of our team on our Patreon page. Go to patreon.com/bookofhours and hit the blue button titled Become a Patron. Thank you.